Okay, welcome to today's webinar. Today's Oregon Eligibility Learning Series is about navigating address changes in ONE. And we also have another announcement because there are 2 changes into the applicant portal that will be launched tomorrow. So today is June 22nd. We are here for many community partners. This webinar is being recorded, and we look forward to sharing information with you and taking all of your questions. We have our subject matter experts here live on the line to answer your questions. Of course, all of these materials, once they're finished, can be found in GroupSite, so please find them there. This webinar is brought to you by a bunch of different people. We have our Community Partner Outreach Program staff. I'm Deanna Simon, one of the Regional Outreach Coordinators, and I would like Christina to introduce herself as well. I'll mute.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina Hernandez, and I'm with the Rockford, Southern Oregon. Nice to be here with you all today.
All right, and we also have our main subject matter expert on today's topic. We have Crystalline Franklin from our policy team. Crystalline, can you say hello? Make sure everybody can hear you.
This is Crystalline Franklin, formerly Crystalline Salyer, so Deanna was happy, right? Just recently changed my last name. I am from the Magi/HSD Medical Eligibility Policy team. I am on Christy Taylor's team. If you're familiar, I'm sure Christy Taylor is a name that is in these meetings a lot. So I am on her team and happy to be here.
Yep, and just in the interest of time, I will say that we have many other folks from our policy teams and our processing teams and David Ballantyne and many other ROCs who work hard to bring you ongoing information. So thanks to everybody who is helping to make this happen. All right, so today's topic is we want to share 2 new applicant portal features that are launching tomorrow. The first one is an updated way to capture names for your clients who you're helping apply. And the second feature is an updated way to report address changes or contact changes in a way that won't cause eligibility to be rerun and in a way that will get quicker enrollment into a new CCO if that's appropriate for that member. So that's really exciting. It's something all of you have been wanting. Both of these changes were driven from community partners. The agency has listened. They prioritized them in the applicant portal, and they are here. And then because we're talking about contact changes and address changes, we will also touch on how to enter an out-of-country address because it isn't intuitive. And we'll have plenty of time for questions. So I am going to pass it over right now to Crystalline to present our first topic.
Thank you so much, Deanna. Hopefully, I'm trying to adjust my headset. Hopefully I sound okay. But thank you for having me here. As I said, I'm Crystalline from the Magi Eligibility Policy team. And yeah, I wanted to take the opportunity to go over some of these important changes. I was involved in some of the system changes here, so that's why Deanna asked me to kind of help go over the changes. And then, as I said, I apologize, but I do have to leave at 9:30, and so Deanna will take over. I have Christy Taylor here as well from my team. And then any changes or any questions that are asked that are after I leave, I'm happy to follow up with those as well. I do want to have a quick call out here that the slide does say that starting on June 23rd, these changes are going in, but we just received information, and obviously things change all the time. And the state, in the work that we do, it actually happened yesterday while I was out of the office, but this change was actually pushed out a few days. And so the change is actually going to go in Sunday night on the 26th. This is to account for a lot of system changes that are happening right now in the eligibility system. And so these 2 had to get pushed out just a couple days. So instead of the 23rd, it is now going to happen overnight on the 26th. So you should start to see these on the 27th. And thank you, Deanna, so much for updating that real time for us. So the right information is on the slide. Okay, so after that disclaimer, wanted to talk about these changes here. So starting June 26th, the applicant portal is now going to ask for new name labels. In the worker portal, I don't know if anyone was familiar with this before from the community partner side, but we used to have a field called preferred name. And this field was asked on the 7210 medical application, and it was they had the ability to enter that name on the worker portal side, but that name really didn't go anywhere. It was kind of only appearing on one screen in the one system, and staff missed it a lot. It didn't appear on notices, and it didn't appear throughout the one system. It also did not carry over to the applicant portal system. This has now changed, which is really exciting. So starting this week, you will now start to see the former preferred name. It has now been enhanced to capture the names individual wants us to use. It's going to be separated into 4 fields. So it'll have first name individual wants us to use, middle, initial, last name individual wants us to use, and suffix. This will be in addition to their existing legal name field as well. So just another name field that is completely optional for members to provide. And this name is going to start appearing in more places, and I'll go through that, kind of where that will appear in the one system. As I said, it will appear in the AP screens, as well as it's going to start appearing on certain eligibility notices coming from the one system as well, as they become piloted and launched. So we're kind of in the middle of some notice redesign work where we're not, releasing all notice updates all at once. We are kind of in a phased approach where we've had a pilot. So starting on May 25th, we piloted the new notice of eligibility generated from the one system in 3 counties. That's Jackson, Marion, and Umatilla. And after that pilot completes, then it will be rolled out statewide. On those notices then in those 3 counties right now, you will start to see, as of 6/26, you will start to see that new name on those notices, on the title of the notice, when you have the address label of who it's addressed to, and then throughout the notice as well, when it talks about who is determined eligible for medical programs, you would also see the individual's name that they provided. I should kind of have a call out here that this is if they provide us with a name. Again, as I mentioned, this is an optional name they can provide. And if they don't provide us with this name, the notices and the system will continue to just only list the legal name that they are required to provide. Really important call out is, oh, sorry, Deanna, sorry, thank you. Last bullet here is that this is really important to note that this change is only specific to the one system right now. We kind of have to start, where we can, and it was determined that, although we cannot make these changes in MMIS yet or other downstream systems, we really wanted to start where we could and get the changes into one and work to update those other systems when we can. But so for right now, these changes are only specific to one. For anybody who has MMIS provider access, you wouldn't see that new name carried over into the MMIS system yet. And so any notices, that are coming from one will only have that name. Any notices coming from the MMIS system, such as medical ID cards, would still show just their legal name on that information. So just a call out and something maybe important to have members and applicants be aware of. Another change to name display. I used the term legal name in the prior slide, but I wanted to make you aware that starting on the same date, on June 26th, the legal name identifier, the legal name labels are being changed to be more inclusive to names that don't originate from Western European culture. So instead of the legal first name and legal last name fields, you'll see those replaced with new name labels titled first/given name and last/family name. There's no changes being made to middle initial or suffix. So as kind of a summary, you'll have 4 required name fields that are these ones here on this slide, and 4 optional name fields, which are the name labels I talked about on the prior slide. Again, this change is very specific to the one system, and although legal name appears in MMIS, it's not going to have the new name label. So it won't say first given name in MMIS or last family name in MMIS. It'll still have the legal name label. And these changes, as Deanna mentioned, are really exciting because these are requests that we got directly from our community, from your teams, from applicants, from staff, folks across the state. So we're really excited to start implementing these changes. This is how the name fields will appear on the applicant portal. So we wanted to just provide you with a screenshot so you could see at first glance what that's going to look like. So we broke it out into, this is one screen on the applicant portal, and you'll see the top section we've highlighted and put a box around it and show that it's required, and the bottom section is optional. We spent a lot of time with some experts in our just different SMEs across the agency, different subject matter experts across the agency regarding how we wanted to frame the lead-in text that you see here. So where it starts with in order, I'm just going to read that off, and you can see the importance of basically listing off this information what the applicant is, so that way they're knowing what name they need to provide. Now that we're not using terms like legal or preferred, these name labels, it's helpful to have this intro text so they know which name they're supposed to give. So the first section for the formerly legal name section, it says, in order to help you apply, we need the name that is currently used on their Social Security record, or if they do not have a Social Security record, the name that is used on government issued documents. Government issued documents include immigration documents, birth certificate, government issued ID, such as driver's license or passport from any country. And so this, again, this is still the legal name that we were capturing before. We just wanted to say it in a better way to where we weren't offending or using terms that are maybe outdated for individuals. In the second section, that remains optional, which we used to only capture one preferred name field. And now you will see in the applicant portal, since you didn't see preferred name before, this is our new optional name field. And it says, in order to respect and honor them, we ask for the name this individual would like us to use for them. We will use the name that you enter here when sending mail about them and talking with you about them. If you do not list a name here, we will use the name that you entered in the question above. And then it breaks out the 4 optional names that they can provide. We are doing a lot of training for our eligibility staff at ODHS and OHA to make sure that staff, if the name is provided, they are using that name in communication with the individual, as that statement says. So lots of training is happening with our workers, and so they are aware of the changes to how they need to address individuals if this name is provided. Is that all we have for the name change section, Deanna? Yes. So did you say we wanted to stop and see if there's any questions here?
We do have some questions in the questions box, so I'm going to go on mute and Christina can help sort through those.
Great.
Hi, so yeah, one of the questions in the chat is, will the names the individual would like us to use have special characters? I work with tribal community and some are unable to enter their actual name.
That's a great question. And I will be able to provide you with the list of special characters after this. I don't have it off the top of my head here handy, but the names the individual would like us to use fields are a lot more flexible than the first given and last family names. Special characters are not allowed in the required name fields except for spaces. But in the optional name fields, the first and last names individual would like us to use, we are permitted to use, I believe, hyphens, and I believe like apostrophes. So there's a lot more flexibility in those fields because they are not using interface information to, for example, run checks for names against like the Social Security Administration and things like that. So that's where we have to be a little more strict in our required name fields, where we have less flexibility with special characters. To answer your question, the short answer is yes, there are allowed special characters, and I will get that list to Deanna after this meeting, after I sign out, and so that way you can have that handy.
Okay, one other question is, are the current paper applications, will they be updated to new ones, or does this change only affect the online portal?
That is an excellent question, and I'm glad you said that because I should have mentioned that earlier. But the 7210 medical application, surprisingly, it's a lot to get updated. We have to work with our federal partners, CMS, the Centers for Medicare Services, and it's a very long, lengthy, like month-long process. It can take a very long time. So at this time, we don't have a time frame for when the 7210 will be updated. However, as I mentioned prior, there is a current preferred name field that is collected on the 7210 Medical app, and we have given staff instructions for when a name is listed there for how to enter that into the system. So for example, if only one name was listed in that field, then we would tell staff to enter that into these corresponding fields to where the first name, the name that they provided would be listed in the first name individual would like us to use, and then we wanted them to use in the last name fields, we wanted them to use the name that was already provided for last family name, basically just to carry it down. So that way their last name would be appearing on the notice. If they don't provide us with the last name on here, then it wouldn't be listed like that on the, it would just basically, whatever they enter on the first name individual would like us to use field, that's how it would appear on their notice. So we don't want to enter just one name on their notice. We're asking them to kind of carry it down and put the last name as well in there. And really we want to be, you know, talking with members as we are talking to them on the phone and as we're answering questions from them and working with them in person, and really explaining that to them that it's the name that you're providing in your former preferred name field is how it's going to appear on notices. So, you know, how would you like it to appear? And if you do want just one name on your notice, that's acceptable as well. But for just consistency, we're asking folks to, if they just put one name on the field, on the application, we're asking them to put the last name, the last family name, and the last names individual would like us to use field. I hope that makes sense. We have a write-up for staff, and I can also share that with Deanna so you can see the kind of guidance that we're giving staff, and if that helps community partners as well to know how it's going to happen.
And then there was a comment about, you know, as long as this doesn't cause member mismatch issues, this is very nice. But
yes, I'm glad you mentioned that as well. Like I mentioned, a lot of training is being done for eligibility staff this week. We also created new training materials for them. We call them quick reference guides, but we've, you know, really tried to prepare our staff adequately to know that, you know, there is going to, you know, this is an exciting change, but it is going to require more work for them to make sure they're searching for both names in the one system. They're not just searching by one name anymore, they're searching by multiple names. So there is a higher risk of increased member match issues. And you know, that was expressed, but the goal from a leadership perspective and from our agency's perspective was that we need to make the system work for our members. And so very good point you bring up, but we'll continue to provide lots of training and monitor the system to make sure that we are kind of mitigating those member match issues.
To be clear, can we talk about that for a quick second? I would, for an application that's put through Applicant Portal. Hi, sorry, this is Christy Taylor. I am a medical policy analyst. Member match, failed member matches happen when an individual is put through Applicant Portal and the one system doesn't know if it knows who that person is or not, right? So, or whether they might have already have a record in the system that might be duplicated. So as long as applications are put in using the first given and last family values, what we previously called legal name, we wouldn't expect necessarily increased failed member matches, would we?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Christy. And no, the way you described it, I mean, I was kind of thinking on the worker portal side, you know, with workers maybe not finding the applicant that already exists when they're entering a new application. If they're just searching by maybe the name the individual wants us to use, and they didn't see that there's already a case out there that only previously had their legal name provided. So there's that risk to it. But to the point you just described, where names coming from applicant portal, I don't see roll that much of an increase maybe or risk.
Perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I do want to just call out real quick too that you might notice that when you're establishing a new application the first couple screens where you are working with a applicant to basically complete the RIDP section. Christy, I don't know if you know what RIDP stands for, but it's like the getting through the security pieces, all that thing, and making sure that the system knows who this person is and they've passed that initial setup. That is still going to require their first given last family names there. It's not until we have established a new application and we start getting through all the the screen collection, where you're asking, you're now on the case basically itself, or you're submitting an application, and you're adding your household members and everything. That's at the point where you're going to start to see these new fields. And then once you enter these new fields, if you do, you'll actually start seeing these new names throughout the applicant portal. You'll see these when you are reporting a change in circumstance. You'll see these when you're going to report an address change, which we'll talk about later. These are new name labels that, if provided, it will be consistent and it will be seen throughout the applicant portal. So if that's the name the individual would like us to use, that's the name that will be appearing throughout the applicant portal.
Awesome, thank you. I don't see, Christina, do we have any additional questions about that? Okay, then I think we're gonna move on. So Chrislyn, why don't you get us started on the next section, which is ways to report an address change, and then I'll pick up when you need to leave.
Thank you so much. All right. The second change that we're really excited about is that there is now going to be a new way to report an address change through the applicant portal. You might recall that there has been previous guidance that the CPOP team and that our team have relayed to community partners to basically have addresses provided, reported in a kind of more timely fashion, so that way it gets updated in MIS quicker. Is that we asked CPs to call the ODHS call center and have eligibility workers assist with reporting address changes through the current non-eligibility update functionality that currently exists in Worker Portal. That previous guidance can now be put to rest because we now have this new ability to report an address change. It's called Report an Address Change, is the new hyperlink. But I'm going to, I guess I got ahead of myself, sorry, Deanna, I'm going to go through that second bullet. If you could go back for a second. Yeah, so this was to avoid the delays that I mentioned in new addresses being reported, being sent to MMIS and causing delays in CCO enrollment when applicable. So when CPs were reporting addresses and members as well through the current report a change in circumstance link that currently exists in applicant portal and will still exist, that functionality, report a change in circumstance, has to go through an eligibility change. So it takes a lot longer. The change has to go through our rules engine, and it can basically not be effective until the first of the following month or the month afterward, kind of depending on the timeline of when the change was reported in the month. This is no longer going to be a problem, and thank you, Deanna. You can go to the next slide now, because now we have this brand new functionality called report an address change, and you can see we've highlighted it in red here. It's going to display on the dashboard right above the current report a change in circumstance link. So the one you're already used to report changes, we've added this new button here. And we'll, oh, you did change the date already. You're so quick, Deanna. So starting again on June 26th, address changes reported in AP via this new report an address change link will be sent to MMIS immediately, same day, real time. This is to allow not only the address, the new address, to go to MMIS immediately. If individuals are moving across counties, they're going to be in a new service area, and then they would have a new CCO. This is going to allow for CCO changes to occur much more quickly. So this is really exciting. And I'll just kind of finish this slide here, and I'll let Deanna take over for me. So when you click on that report and address change link, you'll see a pop-up, and this is Deanna's going to go through kind of some of these scenarios that are listed here. But basically, we just want to call this out as this screen is pretty important. Kind of read through these points with the member, with the applicant, excuse me, when you are, I guess with the member at their reporting changes before you are using this functionality. So there's some notes here about when an address change should be reported and when the address change would be considered a change in eligibility. And like I said, Deanna will go through those things. Like, for example, if somebody was moving out of state, that's an eligibility change. They're no longer eligible for Medicaid because they've permanently moved out of state. So we wouldn't want to use the address change functionality. But like I said, Deanna will go through those. Once you start the address change, it will not save it. There's no save functionality. So once you click OK and you start moving through the screens, if you get timed out, if you don't submit the change, all your changes will be lost. So that's just an important note to be aware of. You have to actually click submit at the end of the screens. And let's see, last bullet here, only report changes for those in the medical case and not for anyone on the case, only for other ODHS programs like SNAP. So this is, you know, just to account for the permissions that we have for CPs to assist us in helping OHP members report changes and apply for medical. But if we have individuals on the shared case, because now we have the shared case structure in the one system, if they're on the case for SNAP only and they're not on the medical household, we wouldn't want to report address changes for those individuals because they're not on the medical case.
Great. Well, Crystalline, I know you need to go, so thank you so much for being here with us. We will answer whatever questions we can as we go forward, and we know that you're available to answer them and send a follow-up email. We can work together to send a follow-up email for anything that we can't answer. So thank you so much for helping us to bring this content to our community partners.
No problem, and thanks for having me. Everybody have a nice day. Thanks.
And I'm going to pick up from here. And Christina and others will be looking at the questions box, so please feel free to type your questions into that questions box and we'll answer what we can. All right, so I do want to go through these specific points. And it's good to review these with yourself and with your applicant or with your member before using this feature to make sure you're using it appropriately. So the first one is, if your new address is temporary and you don't consider it your permanent address, only update your mailing address. Quiz for all of you. Why is that? You don't have to type it into the questions box. Answer it in your head. Why do we not want to change your address other than your mailing address unless you're moving permanently? Because you don't want to get disenrolled from your CCO. So your home CCO is responsible for your care, even if you're temporarily away from home, and they're the ones that they're coordinating that care. So you want to make sure that your address is consistent with your enrolled CCO. If you are away from Oregon temporarily, but you plan to return, only update your mailing address. I think it's a very similar bullet. Next, if you no longer live in Oregon, click Cancel below and choose the Report a Change of Circumstance option on the My Dashboard page instead. The reason for that is that if you no longer live in Oregon, that is an eligibility change. It's not just an address change. So you do need to report your change in circumstances so that we can rerun eligibility and you can be disenrolled from Oregon Medicaid or OHP so the person can then be enrolled in a different state's Medicaid. Next, if anyone who is already getting benefits on your case has permanently moved in or out of the household, including to or from a facility, first submit the address change, then report a change in circumstance to make any necessary changes to individual living arrangements. What that last one is basically saying is that if anybody is moving into or out of the household, even if they're on the case, you need to report that in reported change of circumstances, because who is living in what dwelling can impact other benefits that they are getting. So that is a household change when somebody is moving into or out of the house. So be sure to, and we'll show you what that looks like in a moment. All right, the first question, before you update an address, there is a first question, which is, does everyone in the household have the same contact information? If everybody has the same address, then it already in the system, then yes, will already be selected. So you can see what the one system already has for that family. If the individuals have recorded different addresses, then no will already be selected. So seeing what the default is there when you log in will tell you what is already present in the one system. You want to make sure that you're only changing it, that you're answering properly, basically. Before I move on, I want to see if there are any questions that we should be answering. So I'm going to pause, I'll go on mute, and I'll let Christina share any questions.
Yeah, so one of the questions is there a limit to what constitutes as temporary for temporary address changes?
I can take that, and no, that we don't have a rule limit about the time frame. It really depends on the circumstance. So it could be some months. Maybe they're out of state helping care for a family member and they don't know when they're going to return, but they still consider Oregon their state of residence and they intend to come back home here. That's temporary. Maybe they're just out of state for school for a while, but they still consider Oregon their home state and they intend to return. Our rules just say that they are away temporarily and intend to return. So there really isn't a time frame limit on that.
Thank
There's a question that says college students in Oregon, but in a different CCO often get tricky. I guess it's just a comment.
That's really the one of the most common conditions we see, and the intent and the desire, honestly, and the requirement for CCOs is that they remain in the home CCO from their, usually it's students moving out of their parents' home or their guardian's home, right? So their home CCO is where they're supposed to stay. Even if they are temporarily away in a different county in Oregon for college, they're supposed to remain in that home CCO, the original one, while they're away. And that original CCO is expected to contractually provide for their care while they are out of their area. I know that doesn't always happen that way. If addresses get changed and students get enrolled in the areas where they're living for college, and I know that happens, but what we want to do is discourage that. That is a temporarily away situation where we only want to update mailing address if they somehow need to get mail, but we wouldn't want to update physical address for students who are only temporarily away and plan to return.
Hi, sorry, I was talking into a muted mic. So one more question is, how are CPs able to identify that they are only, I think this is looking at the cases where there might be a SNAP person on them listed on as the same member of a household for somebody that has medical. So the question is, how are CPs able to identify that they're only on the, or that people are only on the medical case and not on the SNAP case? I am confused on that point.
Well, they might be on both, and that's okay. I think the real issue is, as a community partner, you only have permission to report changes on behalf of the medical case. So if somebody is not on a medical case and they're only on a SNAP case, you don't have permission to be reporting changes for them. But the question is, how do you tell? And maybe one of our policy folks can chime in and help out with that.
I'm sorry, I have to say I'm not completely familiar with applicant portal views in order to know what it looks like to be able to tell. So potentially it's on there. I'm not sure what it looks like. I can't answer that.
Thank you. I'm thinking that if people go into the dashboard and you look under My Actions and you look at the case summary, you'll be able to see who's on that medical case. If somebody else is on that case and they don't have medical, either they won't show there or there would be some indicator. So I'm thinking that under the My Actions tab, that case summary is likely where you're going to find it. But community partners, some of you on the line here might know. If you have an answer to that, can you please type it into the chat and we can look at those and share any good information that we get that we want to share. Otherwise, we'll have to get back to you. All right. All right, I'm going to move on here, and Christina will flag me if there are any more questions or any more clarifications needed. We do allow you to change the address for everyone in your household or just some folks. So this question is really about, does everyone in the household have the same contact information? And that's about the current status, like that, whatever defaults there. I'm going to say it again because we've answered some other questions. Whatever it shows up as there. So if it says yes, it means that the one system thinks that everybody has the same contact information. If it says no, then it means the one system thinks that there's different contact information for different household members. So then you know if it needs to change or not. All right, here's the next piece of it. Do not update the physical address if you're only temporarily away. We talked about this quite a bit. And it's because CCOs are responsible for coordinating that care for members while temporarily away. Update only the mailing address if somebody needs to get mail separately for some reason, and contact the CCO or have the member contact the CCO to coordinate access to services while they're away from home, because that is the CCO's responsibility. These are just detail slides about those top line statements in the warning screen. So, and I'll say it again because this is important. Don't use this feature to report a move out of Oregon, because that new permanent out-of-state address needs to be logged as a change in residency so that we can determine eligibility correctly. So use that report a change in circumstance link instead. All right, here's an example. Someone is moving out of the household. An example that we thought might be more common would be a child or children moving from one parent's house to another. So in that case, you would report an address change and update the address for the children, and then click to submit. That will send the information to MMIS immediately, and it will help the children be enrolled in, if they are moving regions, in their new CCO more quickly. However, because they have moved out of the household, you also need to report a change in circumstance. So you would click back to the dashboard, select report a change in circumstance, and then report that someone has moved out of the household. Now, if they are only moved, so that would be the way to report it, especially if they need to be enrolled in a different CCO, to make sure that CCO enrollment doesn't get stuck in the eligibility process, as Crystalline was explaining earlier. I'm going to give you one more example, and then we'll take any additional questions that people have. So when somebody moves out of the house or into the house, and we update the address with that special update the address or link, that will disenroll them from their old CCO the following day. So not only does it expedite enrollment into their new CCO on a faster timescale, but it will get them into OpenCard right away so that they aren't stuck in an old CCO from an old region when they've moved to a new region. And then that child or that member will be on OpenCard until they get enrolled into their new CCO, which will be on the next weekly cycle instead of the next monthly cycle. When you use the report an address change feature. Just as a little note, if you use the report a change in circumstance and a CCO change is needed, that can take over a month. So that's really the difference between reporting in these two different ways for a lot of folks, is that CCO timeline. Here's the second scenario, and then we'll take questions. The second scenario is somebody who's already on the case is moving in. And the reason we said already on the case is that if you have somebody new moving in, that's just a report of change in circumstances, right? You're reporting that change. But if they're already on the case and they're just moving into the house, for example, the family claims grandma who's been living on her own, but now she's moving in with the family. You would report an address change and update the address for grandma and then click to submit. That will send her information to MMIS immediately. But because you had a person moving between physical households, then you need to go back on the dashboard and report a change in circumstance and report that grandma has moved into the house so that one knows she is in the home. That could impact other benefits like the SNAP case. So those changes in household composition always need to be reported as a change in circumstance. And now I will pause and turn it over to Christina. I will mute.
There's just a couple of questions, I think more concerns about people talking about helping members who are temporarily away and working with the CCOs for coordinating care. So the guidance is to reach out to the CCOs because they are required to coordinate care for those members. So we suggest reaching out to the care coordination team who might be able to help with that. But if you're still experiencing issues, then the next step would really be to reach out to CSU to try to work on to try to address those access to care issues and then kind of going from there. But let me see, there's a couple of other questions. Do you always report in that order, address change and then the change in circumstances? I think it's for the situations I think that we just talked about in this slide.
Yes, I would recommend that you first report an address change because that is a non-eligibility update and it will move things to MMIS right away and it will make any changes in access to care happen quickly. After that, you then go and report the change in circumstance, which would be that household composition change. Are there any more questions?
Okay, so another question is, if an OHP patient has an out-of-state or an out-of-country visitor, that doesn't count for reporting a change of household, does it? We frequently see patients with family members from an out of the country that temporarily visit, but for weeks or months at a time.
As far as I know, visitors do not count toward the household, but if any of my policy folks would like to chime in, I'm happy to hear more information.
That's correct. Visitors do not need to be added to the households.
Oops, nobody could hear me on that, sorry. As far as I know, that will not change anything for the ODHS benefits case or the medical case. Would anybody from the policy team like to comment on that additionally?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Christina, should we move on or do we have more questions? Okay, we have a question about MMIS access. I'll let Christina read it and see what we can gather.
It's just, are CPs going to have MMIS access upgraded, or as of now, we have to call client services to see what CCO is scheduled to be assigned?
Yeah, we do know that community partners with MMIS access have a better time figuring out what CCO a client is enrolled in. And that can be challenging in areas that have more than one CCO. Right now, you would need to call, that's a good question. Would it be the client services unit or eligibility to find out which CCO the member is enrolled in? And we really don't have any answers about MMIS access for other community partners at this time, but it's an active discussion, I can tell you that. In terms of calling eligibility or CSU, do any of our subject matter experts want to comment on which one might be a better avenue?
This is David. I will. I would suggest client services unit. They're really there for anybody who has active benefits that needs help in the CCO enrollment arenas and any access to care issues. They're really the experts on that side.
Thank you. All right. This is what
sorry, one last thing, and they have much shorter wait times.
Bonus. All right, so if somebody's moving in, we just wanted to point out that to remind everybody, this is what the screen looks like if you report a change in circumstances, right? You still have to do that if somebody's moving in or if somebody's moving out, and there are two different options for that. We just wanted to be sure to show that screen. When you report a change in address change or a contact information change, it will ask if you want to change or if the member wants to change their current CCO selection. And this screen will always show. So those moving to a county with a new CCO will be disenrolled from their old CCO and enrolled into a new CCO regardless of the answer. So if I'm moving from Multnomah County to Deschutes County and I say, no, I don't want to change my CCO, that cannot be honored, right? However, if I'm moving within Multnomah County from one place to another and I say no, then they're able to honor it because I still have my same CCO that serves that region. So as long as your same CCO is going to serve you with your new address, then we can honor a no change. But we always give that option of yes or no. Are there any questions about that, Christina, before we move on? Okay, we might have some additional questions, but we're going to save those for the end. So the CCO choice screen, like we said, will always show. And sorry, my apologies. This is, if they are moving to a new area, then they will be enrolled in a new CCO. If they say no, and they're moving to an area with a choice of CCOs, then they will be randomly, I don't know, or auto enrolled into one of the CCOs based on the algorithms. If they're moving to an area with 2 CCOs and they want to choose, then they should say so here. But of course, after that enrollment, I think people can still change their CCO. They have various timelines to do that, so it's not written in stone. And CSU would be the place to call to change CCO enrollment. Right, at the end of making any changes, it will let you know that you've made those changes, and you must press submit if you want those changes to be saved. They do not get saved along the way. And if you don't click submit and you get logged out, then you have to start over again. And after you click submit, you should see this screen. It should look somewhat familiar to you. After this screen runs and processes your application, you'll be taken back to the dashboard, and that is your signal the change has been completed. To confirm it worked, you can report an address change again. You can click on that same link again, and you'll be able to see the new address that you've reported in those screens. So that's how you would confirm that it worked. All right, before we move, the next section is to talk about CCO enrollment timeline, the next weekly cycle and how that works, just to make sure you're all aware of it. Are there any questions, Christina, before we move on to enrollment timelines?
I see one question. I'm not sure if I understood it, but I'll try to read it out loud. So in regards to the order in which changes are reported and the initial list of changes set up, or is the initial list of changes set up differently, or is that where we indicate who's those type of changes so that the AP takes us through those changes we marked on the list, or has that structure changed?
Thank you. That structure has not changed. So when you click report an address change, we're only asking for address and contact information change. When you click report a change in circumstance, those screens should look the same. You say what you want to report and it will take you through the application. So that second link there should be the same functionality that you're used to. Any other questions before we move on, Christina?
There's a question about if we're helping individuals who are experiencing homelessness with no, don't have an address but are assigned a CCO. Is there a way to allow for them to remain on open card?
Currently, we do not have that functionality. So we ask for the county where they spend most of their time, and that is how we enroll them into a CCO where they're spending their time. And if they move to another region and they're going to be spending their time in another region, then that address should be reported, that address change, so they can access care in their new region. We have heard requests for people who are transient and moving around a lot to have a different set of rules. We've heard that, but that is not how it stands right now. But we're aware of the challenges when people are moving around a lot. And right now, I think there are 2 options. One is to report the change of the new area. The other one is to say this person still spends most of their time in their home county, and their CCO is responsible for coordinating their care, even if they're temporarily away from home. So those would be 2 different options for those folks that we can offer. And it's not a perfect answer, but it's what we have. Right, Christina, anything else before we move on? All right, so if a member is moving to a different CCO region, we want to make sure everybody knows how that works and what to expect so that you can help guide your members on how to access care. Here are some guidelines. They will remain in the old CCO until the end of the day on which they submitted the address change in 1. Now, this is really specifically talking about using that new link, which is report an address change. So if you use that and they're moving to a new region, they will remain in that old CCO until the end of that day that you clicked submit. But the next day, they will be on fee for service. Now, they will be in fee for service until they're enrolled in their new CCO. And when they get enrolled in their new CCO depends on when that change is reported. Let's take a look at what that looks like. In fact, this I'm going to go off the cuff here. This is Christina's slide and her graphic. Do you want to talk about this? Or do you want me to keep rolling with it?
I can talk about it a little bit, but so typically when somebody, so an application that gets approved or that when the change happens between Monday and Wednesday, the new CCO enrollment will occur the Monday of the following week. So if we look at the little calendar, say on your screen, this is showing February, but if the changes happen by, say, February 9th, then on the 14th is when the CCO enrollment is most likely to happen. If the change is reported after Wednesday, then the new CCO enrollment would occur on the Monday following that. So it wouldn't be on the 14th. So say we reported the change on, February 10th, the CCO would start on February 21st.
Thank you. There may be questions about that. This is because those batches of information are only sent to the CCOs once a week. So if you get in before that batch is sent, then you might get the earlier enrollment. But if you just miss that batch being sent and you report that change just after it, you have to wait for the next batch of data. So that is why we see this type of timeline. But this next weekly cycle is much better if you're trying to access care in your new region than the alternative, which is the next monthly cycle, which is what you get if you report a change in circumstance. Are there any questions, Christina, about the next weekly cycle or CCO enrollment timelines?
There's one question, but I think it says that, I helped a client to change their CCO, but it's been a couple of weeks and and it hasn't been updated yet. So that's likely because this change that we're talking about today isn't in the system yet. So it's going to go in on the weekend. So next week it should happen. But if your client is experiencing any issues, then like access to care issues, really encourage you to reach out to the CCOs to speak to their care coordination team. And if that's not helping, them reaching out to CSU because they might be able to expedite that disenrollment into the new CCO if there's some urgent medical need for the client.
Yeah, the CSU, Client Services Unit, can expedite that disenrollment, like Christina said, and put them on open card more quickly if that is getting hung up. But the best way, right, for this week, until this change shows next week, to report a change of addresses is to call and have an eligibility worker do it, because they can do it and tap into this next weekly cycle so that you don't have that hang up that person was sharing. It's a little convoluted. It's hard to talk about, but hopefully it's sinking in for those of you who are trying to grasp it. All right, there are some other abilities to change contact information. So this new feature will allow updates to all contact information, not just the physical address and the mailing address, and not just the CCO enrollment like we showed, but also it will ask about phone number and email, voter registration, preferred language, and contact preferences. So all those screens you should be familiar with from the main application. People can now update that contact information and voter and that other information without it rerunning eligibility. All right. I'll cover how to enter an out-of-country address, and then we'll take some more questions from Christina. So let's say a household member lives in another country. This might be happening because you claim somebody who lives in another country. Those tax dependents or a spouse married filing jointly who lives in a different country will be on your application because they're part of your tax filing household, even though they're not receiving medical benefits. They're not applying for or receiving benefits, but they're still in your what's called your eligibility household or your eligibility group. So in order to enter their address, you may have noticed that the applicant portal does not give you an option for out-of-country addresses. So this is our workaround. We wanted to make sure you have it. Since we're sharing information about an address change feature, we thought we'd share information about how to enter that out-of-country address. You would type out of country in the address line 1 field So instead of putting a street address, like 500 Summer Street Northeast, you would just type out of country. But then you would type the same city and state as the applicant. So if I'm applying and I'm claiming my child who is out of the country, I would write for their street address out of country, but then for me it would be Bend, Oregon. So that's what I would write, out of country in Bend, Oregon. It's not quite intuitive, which is why we're sharing it, and that is the workaround for handling that. A special note is that you should not update addresses for Oregonians who are traveling outside of the United States because they're only temporarily away. So just keep in mind that temporary versus permanent move that we talked about earlier. And if you have any questions about it, please feel free to type them into the questions box. Now is our time for questions, additional questions, so I'll turn it over to Christina to see what we have.
I don't see any new ones. I think some of the ones that I see we've already answered.
I do see a question here, which is, can we just report a phone number change as well? I believe so. That is my understanding. I haven't tried this feature yet, but that's my expectation. So hopefully that is what we find when it launches next week.
And I do see somebody wants to see the previous slide.
Right, I have another question here. If an individual does not have a home address, can they claim general delivery at the post office? The answer is yes, but. So I would just say proceed with caution. They can have as their mailing address general delivery at the post office, but typically a post office will only hold mail for a few weeks. 3 is pretty common. If that person is not going to pick up their mail every 3 weeks, the post office will send it back to the sender, and then they won't be getting their mail. So absolutely, they can use general delivery. And if you can just make sure they're thinking about that, that would mean they're not getting their Oregon Health Plan mail if they're not picking it up frequently enough. So thank you for sharing that with folks. Okay, we're just going to pause here and make sure we're getting to the questions that we can that are about this topic. Remember, this webinar is being recorded and we'll post it, so any additional questions we can answer after we stop recording or as a follow-up. Okay, I think that's it. Do any of our policy folks or other subject matter experts have anything else to chime in about before we start to wrap it up?
I can't think of anything. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We will post this recording to GroupSite, and we will also make sure these slides are available to you. We will send them to you via email and a follow-up, and they'll be posted to GroupSite as well. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of our policy members for joining us as well, and David Ballantyne and others. It takes a whole team of people to bring you this information, and it takes a whole team of people to improve our systems. So just a huge thank you to community partners who continue to stay engaged, to tell us what we need to know, and then we get to look at our system, figure out where we can make an improvement, and little by little, it becomes a better system for everybody. So thank you for everything you do, and have a terrific Wednesday.